Welcome to City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Bobby Regan, Chair of the City Club's Forum Board. For more than a century, City Club of Portland is where civic-minded people have come together to find solutions to our region's biggest challenges. We're gathered today at the Sentinel Hotel and are joined by thousands of people via X-Ray FM and its radio stations at 107.1 and 91.1 FM, KGW's website, Facebook feed, and news app, and Open Signal's community media stations. We are incredibly grateful for all the work they do bringing Friday Forum to our community. In addition to City Club's valued media partners, our sponsors, volunteers, and staff enable us to put on Oregon's best civic programs week after week. I'd like to especially thank AARP Oregon and Avangrid Renewables for their generous support of this and all of our Friday Forums this fall. I'd also like to thank IRCO, the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization, for its support today. We're also fortunate to have Civic Scholars here today. For those of you not familiar with the Civic Scholars program, City Club works with high schools throughout the region to bring students to Friday Forum and give them opportunities to participate in civic dialogue. Thanks to the David Douglas High School Civic Scholars, for being here today. Go Scots. This discussion about the future of our politics and our country needs your voice. Please join me in showing our appreciation to everyone who has made this event possible. You may have noticed that this summer, Senator Jeff Merkley went viral. Millions of people watched Senator Merkley on Facebook Live as he walked up to a detention facility in Brownsville, Texas, looking for information about the children who were being held there. This was in June, and if you remember, we were just beginning to learn about the Trump administration's policy of separating undocumented immigrant children from their parents. That moment, outside that windowless building, was horrifying because it showed how far out of reach these small children really were. Even a U.S. Senator couldn't see them. This is just one episode in a strange and unsettling 18-month period. Now, we're a few months from midterm elections, and there are signs that major shifts are ahead. Will Democrats find a strategy to counter destructive policies being put forward by the so-called alt-right? Can Republicans reestablish themselves as a big tent party led by family values? And is there room in either party for moderate voices? With us today is a Democratic lawmaker who once interned for a Republican lawmaker, U.S. Senator Mark Hatfield. Senator Merkley has risen in recent years within the Democratic Party as both parties try to find their footing in the Trump era. Senator Jeff Merkley got his start in politics not far from here as the student body president at David Douglas High School in Southeast Portland. After graduating from Stanford University with a degree in international relations, then earning a Master of Public Affairs at Princeton, he went on to work in Washington, D.C., at both the Pentagon and the Congressional Budget Office. When he came back to Oregon, Merkley led Portland's Habitat for Humanity and later became president of the Oregon World Affairs Council. In 1998, Jeff Merkley was elected to the Oregon House of Representatives, and in 2007 became Speaker of the Oregon House, a position he held until his election to the U.S. Senate, where he serves today. Interviewing Senator Merkley is Marisa Madrigal, the former interim chair of Multnomah County. Madrigal graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in zoology, holds a master's degree in security studies from the Naval Postgraduate School, and is a newly elected member of City Club's Board of Directors. Please join me in welcoming U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley and Marisa Madrigal.
Senator, it's an honor to be here with you today. I know that your schedule is incredibly busy. How are you holding up?
Well, I think we have a choice right now between despair and curl up on our couches and hope when we get off the couch something will be better, or to be fully engaged. And I'm aiming for the full engagement version of that.
That's excellent news, and including in Iowa and New Hampshire, which delights me. I've been talking to a lot of people today about how I was going to interview you today, and what emerged were all these wonderful stories about you, but my favorite was from my boss this morning, Deborah Kafori, the chair of Multnomah County, and she recounted a trip to DC that she took when you were both on the same plane, and she said, he is just the kindest, most humble man. He waited for me outside the plane. I was way in the back. He waited for me. He asked if I wanted to share a ride back to the Hill, and then he shared his sandwich with me in the back. And that aligns with the values and the ethics that I've seen in the stories about you. But what I wanted to start with is I read that your father honed your policy chops at the dinner table, that the Merkley household talked about the news. And so I have this vision of a young Jeff Merkley arguing very calmly and evenly for better environmental regulations and different policy. How far off am I vision-wise?
My father had a view of the world that really was affected by, he had a disease that paralyzed him when he was a teenager, and he recovered, but it always made him very sensitive to the issue of equal opportunity and fairness in society. And also as a union mechanic, he was so in love with the notion of workers getting a fair share of the wealth they work to create, and opportunity through our public schools. So these were all values. The dinner table quickly would go to the evening news, and it was really the commentary that he would run on the things that were happening. Of course, we were in the Vietnam War era, we were in the Civil Rights era, and also during that period when Nixon was in office, we were talking about the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the establishment of the EPA. We may have forgotten that environment used to be a very bipartisan topic, but all those things would come up, and I would like to, as maybe teenagers like to do, I'd like to deliberately disagree with my dad on things just to upset him a little bit.
I was wondering about that. Was there, so you mentioned a couple topics, but are there any memories or particular policy discussions that you had that you found especially formative that you apply today in your work?
I think probably when I was talking about his sense of opportunity for all and being against discrimination, he was appalled when he had gone down, he was originally from Arizona and had been on the bus, and when he got to the border with Texas, the bus driver stopped the bus and instructed all the people on the bus who were from communities of color to have to go to the back of the bus. Just totally 1,000% appalling to him that should be in the United States. Similarly, during World War II, he worked in Costa Rica with the effort to build a highway in case our opponents bombed the Panama Canal. And the Costa Ricans who were working got paid 1/10 of what the Americans were paid. And so he'd bring up these stories of discrimination and really kind of drilled into the injustice. And I think it's one reason that in every opportunity I've wanted to fight for everyone to have a chance. We have that vision in our Constitution, but our history has been one of working towards the ideal, overcoming many, many obstacles. When my father was born, women could not yet vote in this country, which is hard to imagine. It's just been in the last 2 generations that we have won that right. And we've stopped the Jim Crow system. We've created other strategies of opportunity, but we still have a long ways to go. And certainly it was a huge honor and privilege to lead the fight for equal opportunity for our LGBTQ community in the Oregon legislature. And then thank you, Bobby.
That's worthy of applause.
And that really led to one of the big surprises of my life, which was Ted Kennedy was ill when I went to the U.S. Senate, and he was reaching out for people to lead different things that were close to his heart, and he asked me to carry the torch on the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which I did. It passed the Senate in 2013, and then I wrote the Equality Act to put equal opportunity for the LGBTQ community on the same foundation as the 1964 Civil Rights Act. We need to pass the Equality Act, way past time, that just continue to allow discrimination in our country.
Absolutely. What would your father say today, do you think, about the state of our discourse in this country, the disagreement on whether facts even exist, the extreme polarization and the disrespectful treatment of each other? How would he approach that, and how do you approach that as a senator?
Well, these are pretty dark times, and we have a president who has adopted the role of divider-in-chief. And during his campaign, he would attack different groups. He would attack veterans. He would attack women, African Americans, Haitian Americans, Latin Americans, Americans with disabilities. It seemed like every group he could think of. That is the opposite of the way this country should be led. We have this phrase in the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, indivisible. Indivisible. Why do we say that? Why do we have that in the pledge? It's a recognition that we come from all over the world, and together we come together and take those diverse cultures, diverse experiences, and we build a more beautiful, more powerful, more successful nation. And we need to reclaim that notion of one nation, indivisible.
Thank you. I agree. One of the things that's been profoundly disturbing to me, to my family, my community as a Latinx American, is the targeting of Latinos, but of Mexicans in particular, as criminals. And you went to the detention center. There's also this current issue where American citizens are being denied passports and re-entry into the United States because their birth certificates are being challenged. And I have to say, my family is not surprised. We feared from the beginning that, and I know many families did, that even our naturalized citizens in our families would be targeted and undermined. It's very difficult to imagine the instability that causes in a community, but what can you give us hope? What can we do?
There is a T-shirt I saw just a few weeks ago that said, 2016 resist, 2017 persist, 2018 vote. And so I think that kind of sums it up. The particular series of attacks on Latino Americans has been appalling. We have, as you noted, the administration has been targeting Americans who have their birth certificates and blocking them from getting passports, or even blocking them from returning to our country with their American passport. Just last week I heard, I haven't been able to fact check this yet, but I'll assume for the moment it's true, that an office was closed on the Texas border that provides the ID cards for people to be able to vote. And they closed it, folks believe, because that way those who live there, who are primarily Latino Americans, have to drive 80 miles to get an ID card to be able to vote, and voter suppression, which you add all these things up, and plus a just basic description of immigrants from the president, basically characterizing them as gang members, rapists, and murderers. Any factual analysis will tell you that immigrants conduct less crimes than Americans born in this country on a per capita basis. And so when we have immigrants who are productive members of our community and they are attacked, whether it's the president attacking Muslim Americans or Hispanic Americans or African Americans or Haitian Americans. Let's reach out to those people in our community from those backgrounds and say, we stand with you, shoulder to shoulder, side by side. We're all Americans, and we're going to go together in unity.
Thank you. You mentioned facts, which I very much appreciate, and I noted that the reason that you went to the border was because you heard about the family separation policy, and you didn't believe that it could possibly be true. So you went to verify for yourself. Can you talk about kind of what was going through your mind at that point, and how you conduct yourself to stay with the facts?
So it was on May 7th that Jeff Sessions, our Attorney General, gave a speech and described this new policy. And I listened to this new policy, and I said, boy, it sounds like they're going to inflict trauma on children. That can't possibly be true. I couldn't envision a series of policy leaders sitting around a table and saying that this is a legitimate, okay strategy. And I do feel that part of my responsibility is to, as a senator, go check things out. This last year, in fact, a year ago September, I think it's another 2 weeks, will be a year anniversary of when Aung San Suu Kyi of Burma gave a speech to the United Nations and said, hey, there's no ethnic cleansing or genocide in Burma. Come and check it out. I invite the world to come see for themselves. And I organized a trip of legislators to go, and we got a lot of cooperation until the day before we left. And the day we left, the Myanmar government, the Burma government, proceeded to pull all permission to visit the region that had been affected, except for the capital of Sittwe. But it was important to go nonetheless, and we learned a lot. And similarly, I went over to visit the Four Famines area of Africa. There are a lot of people facing starvation, and American food through the World Food Program is saving a lot of people. But also, we're trying to develop programs to increase the productivity of those areas. And so it's in that kind of spirit that I thought, this sounds horrific. This can't be the case. I better go check it out. That was what was in my mind. And when I went down, the plane I was taking out of Houston was late, so I had to miss my first planned gathering, which was to go out on the bridge at the Hidalgo McAllen port of entry, because I had heard that families were camping out on the bridge, but I couldn't get to that. But my second appointment was to go to the processing center. And the processing center, there was press located outside, and they said, well, what are you going to see inside? And I said, well, I have no idea, but surely you've been allowed to see. And they said, no, the press has never been let in. That was kind of the first alarm bell. Like, really? The press has not been allowed to see how we're treating immigrants inside this building? And of course, that's just where I walked in and I saw the chain link cages with families being thrown into them. They had a Mylar blanket, no mattresses, everybody very distressed. That, though, was not the real horrific part. The real horrific part was the warehouse where they'd set up bigger cages, and they bring in a family and then separate the boys into this cage, the girls into that cage. And I'm standing there, and they wanted me to see things like, well, let's show you our kitchen. I said, no. Let's show you our first aid station. I said, no, I want to see what's in this room and what you're doing here. And I'm standing in front of this 30 by 30 foot cage link or a chain link cage, and the boys are lining up by height, and the smallest is just knee-high to a grasshopper, not much taller than this table here. And I'm like, the child is only probably 4 or 5 years old at most. And so I'm asking them, so were these young boys separated from their parents? And they said, well, not all of them. Some came across as unaccompanied minors. But I said, a good share of these? And they said, yes. I said, where do you do that? Well, he said, we do it over there at the edge of the warehouse. We bring them the family, and then we take the boys here, the girls there. And I was just stunned that this was the case. And then I went from there up to Brownsville, where the Walmart is. And advocates had told me that there were hundreds of boys being put in there from this child separation policy. And I had asked for official permission to get in, and I'd been denied. They had a 2-week policy, and they also had a waiver policy, so I asked for a waiver. Waiver was denied. So my team said, should we bother to go up there because we can't get in? I said, yes, go up there and knock on the door, because surely there's a staff member who can show me around. Surely, at a big facility. And so, as many of you know, I knocked on the door, called up the phone number that was on the outside. The supervisor's assistant said, yes, he'll come out and talk to you, perhaps give you a tour. And then instead, what he did is he called the police. So I'm standing there in front of the building as the police cars start arriving. I think, okay, wow, what are they hiding? And even as I was standing there doing a Facebook Live and saying, I've heard from advocates that there's up to 1,000 young boys inside here, I couldn't believe that that was the case. I mean, 1,000 thrown in there. It turned out there weren't 1,000. There were about 1,467. It's almost 1,500. One busload short of capacity at 15. And I say capacity because they had initially had 300 and 300 bedrooms, and then they just kept raising the amount until they had 5 per room. And they were telling, oh, wonderful, they can play in the soccer fields and the game room. Yeah, 1,500 boys are going to share one soccer field, and we'll figure that math out on that. And I said, what are you missing? A few months ago, you had 300 boys. Now you have almost 1,500. What are you missing? They said, well, mental health counselors.
Wow.
And I said, how many? They said, we need 90 more mental health counselors. I thought, there was no planning that went into this. And you think about, these are kids escaping trauma abroad, going through trauma, getting to the U.S., and then traumatized by being taken away from their parents, and they didn't have mental health counselors.
That is a perfect segue into our next topic. I would love to talk about the sort of lurching policy initiatives of this administration. But before that, I want to remind our radio audience that this is the City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Marisa Madrigal, and with me today is Jeff Merkley, U.S. Senator from Oregon. This week, the New York Times published a stunning op-ed, an anonymous op-ed from within the Trump administration, purportedly from a senior official in the administration, detailing a resistance. They wrote, quote, "Many Trump appointees have vowed to do what we can to preserve our democratic institutions while thwarting Mr. Trump's more misguided impulses until he's out of office." Unfortunately, it sounds like they weren't able to thwart this particularly hideous policy. But what is your take on that piece? Is this person or group of people a hero or heroes?
So 2 things happened this week, 2 days apart. One was the announcement of Bob Woodward's book, Fear, in which he interviewed more than 100 individuals inside the administration. And then this anonymous op-ed in the New York Times. And the individual writing that op-ed in the New York Times called himself part of the resistance, but he didn't mean the resistance in the way I would mean the resistance, that is, differing in policies. He meant it in terms of taking on the fact that the president is uninformed, uninterested, ill-equipped to ponder information, erratic, and unhinged. And that somehow they're trying to glue the administration together, despite that our elected president is totally unsuitable to the job. And it made me think about General Mattis serving as the Secretary of Defense. We have a tradition in this country that you have to be a civilian. You have to be out of military office for 7 years to serve as Secretary of Defense. Civilian control of the military, very important principle. The Senate was voting on a waiver for that principle. I gave a bit of a fiery speech saying we should maintain civilian control. John McCain came down and excoriated me on that. But when I lost and the waiver was approved, I happily voted for General Mattis because I thought he was the most responsible individual that could possibly be in this administration to prevent this president from starting a totally unjustified war. And I think of him as part of that. And he actually is cited in the Bob Woodward's book as doing things to calm down the president and stop egregious things from happening. But it just tells you we're in this very strange time. I mean, our world leadership has been vastly diminished. The respect for the presidency of the United States is greatly diminished. Europe is looking around going, since World War II, we have a lot of folks in our coalition in Europe. It's good to look to the U.S. for leadership and to help unify us, and not now, not now. And the fact is we have a president who is attacking our allies. He's attacking our economic allies in the G7. He's attacking our military allies in NATO. He's undermining Article 5 of NATO, which is a common defense article. And he's cozying up to dictators around the world. So we are in very unprecedented and strange times, and we need people like General Mattis.
Let's zero in on that piece. I think going beyond maybe his instability or being uninformed, I want to share with you an excerpt from a book called How Democracies Die. And it's written by some political scientists who study the rise and fall of authoritarian regimes. And they say that there are 4 markers of authoritarian behavior: rejection of or weak commitment to democratic rules of the game, denial of the legitimacy of opponents, toleration or encouragement of violence, and readiness to curtail civil liberties of opponents, including media. Does that sound like anyone you know?
Unfortunately, it sounds way too much like what we're seeing right now. It's something I just never could have anticipated. Just a virulent attack on undermining the legitimacy of the press, the legitimacy of policy opponents. Again, this strategy of dividing Americans against other Americans, all those are hallmarks of a path to tyranny.
Mm-hmm. So if we peer into the future to January 2021, when the next president of the United States will be inaugurated, and we will have proceeded through a few more years of what's happening now, barring some major shift, how will or should that person who is president begin the process of strategically and tactically rebuilding our civil discourse, putting down the rise of white supremacy, bringing back respectful debate in our institutions?
Well, while we're talking about this, I'm just thinking about everyone who's gathered here in this room. And I just do a little survey, and I'll announce it for the radio, but how many folks are deeply concerned about the future of our democratic republic right now? How many folks are not too terribly concerned? Well, just for the radio, that was like every 1 to nothing, something like that. And so it is difficult times. We have the ability to restore, let me put it this way. The attitudes and perspectives that permeate the government come from the top. And so it's important before we have a January 2021 to have a campaign in which individuals try to outdo each other by turning to the unity of America rather than the division of America. The beauty and value of our diversity rather than the opposite. The valuing of science and facts to help guide us. We haven't talked, for example, at all today about climate chaos, but many here in the room have smelled the smoke. As we've had it across Oregon, we have longer, hotter summers that are profoundly affecting not just our natural resources, but our economy. We have an acidified ocean that now we have to artificially buffer it to raise oysters on the Oregon coast. We have warmer winters that are great for pine beetles and bad for pine trees. That's just, here in our state. But it's through looking at the reality of what the scientific community is telling us that we're going to have responsible policy to take it on. And I'll just have to put in a pitch here at the moment and say we have got to pursue a fast transition from burning fossil fuels for energy to 100% clean and renewable energy. And in the course of it, I hope that that debate that leads up to January 2021 is also about the fundamentals that are being neglected on which families thrive. Healthcare and housing and education and living wage jobs, and also, how do you get there through the right trade policy and the right infrastructure policy. But also that there are three powerful forces that are corrupting our democracy, and we have to find a way to take those on. And one of those forces is gerrymandering, and one is voter suppression, and one is dark money in politics. And if we don't attack those things, then everything else is at risk.
I'd like to pivot a little bit and talk about threats to the United States from outside the nation. And I think that there are threats related to our elections, to our democratic processes from foreign nations. Can you share with me, what keeps you up at night and what you think the country is going to have to face in the next few years?
Well, it is profoundly troubling that Russia intervened so massively in our last election. And I don't have to share classified secrets because so much is public about the strategies they use. They use social media extensively. They created false incidents. They created false groups. They created false insults to make people angry with each other. There's actually been protests in America against groups that don't even exist in reaction to stuff on social media. And it plays into this dividing Americans against Americas. Russia wants to undermine the legitimacy of the United States. And the more division they can drive, which unfortunately parallels very well with what candidate Trump's strategy was to create divisions. But they're going to keep at it. They're at it today. Whether it's on issues regarding firearms and the Second Amendment and school shootings, or a host of other issues, they're creating false stories, false pressures, false groups to drive division. We need to have, from the highest level in our government, from the Oval Office, we have to have a fierce watchdog that says, Russia, you mess around with us, and there are profound, huge consequences. We don't have that in the Oval Office right now. We have drugged the president kicking and screaming into a few sanctions. Even the CAATSA sanctions have not been fully applied, and we have to. So there is an act called the Deter Act that is all about saying this message to Russia: you mess with our elections, we mess with your economy in ways you're really not going to like, and I think that that's an important act we should pass.
One thing that I've been concerned about is, in relation to that, is the seeming, with you accepted from this, lack of technological savvy from some of our elected leaders. The Russians are manipulating our socio-technological landscape, and changing American behavior through their manipulation, but some senators, when questioning Mark Zuckerberg, were asking questions like, is Facebook the same as Twitter? That is terrifying to me. The Russians are not asking those questions, so what can we do in this country to up our game in this realm?
Well, I'm so glad we had Zuckerberg up before Congress to hold these kinds of hearings, to have that examination, and hopefully what you just cited is not the technology IQ of the average technology IQ of a member of Congress, but we still have members who the idea of a personal computer is still a strange idea. So we're progressing. We depend upon our younger staff members to bring us into this world of social media and the implications of it. But it does create such a vulnerable place for manipulation. And while I was talking about the Russians, every group in the world that wants to change the outcome is now looking to how they can use social media to have that impact. So it's going to be a problem that will be with us. Even if the Russians desist, we're going to have to understand it inside and out. We need lots of hearings on Capitol Hill. We need something equivalent to a cyber warfare department that specializes in all of the aspects of taking on this challenge.
Thank you. Speaking of our democracy, and let's talk a little bit about elections and fall 2018. Any predictions or thoughts for us?
Is everybody going to vote? Well, I'll just relay what is, this isn't any insider insight, but the House, I think it's extremely likely will go Democratic in this coming election, and I think will be an important check on the presidency. In the U.S. Senate, there are 35 seats up, and out of those, there's 10 Democrats running in seats that Trump won, in states that Trump won. And then there's another 4 offensive races that are of great interest in Nevada and Arizona and Tennessee and Texas. Go Beto O'Rourke.
That's excellent news.
And Texas, quite frankly, I have no doubt without voter suppression, Beto O'Rourke would win Texas. And that's why probably the reason that story about the voter ID location office being shut down troubles me. I want to find out more. I maybe have to take a trip down there and see if that really happened.
Perhaps you should.
And shine a light on that. But of those 35 races, to summarize the stats, Democrats would have to win 80% of the races to take the majority. So pretty tall order. Hold 26, take 2 more. And at this moment, it's really a drama. Even if you don't care about the outcome, there are 10 seats that are essentially tied out of those 35. That's in great uncertainty. It could go any which way in the next. Now we're down to under 60 days. So here we go.
Before we move to audience questions, I wonder if you could give us an update on the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court and anything that you think that we should know.
So Brett Kavanaugh is not at all concerned about those corrupting forces I meant, not about the gerrymandering, not about the dark money. He supports Citizens United, not about the voter suppression. He doesn't disagree with having struck down the Voting Rights Act. He has found in his decisions every opportunity to always find for the powerful over the less powerful, whether it is environmental issues, whether it's consumer rights issues, whether it's workers and the ability to organize, whether it's health care, or whether it's the reproductive rights of women. So I am absolutely concerned that he represents the corrupting of our Constitution from the we the people vision to government by and for the powerful. And he has one additional factor that everyone should be worried about, and that is he believes in an imperial presidency. A presidency in which the president can not only not be indicted, but cannot be investigated. A presidency in which the president has the ability to fire special prosecutors at will. A presidency in which a president can ignore the law if the president believes, if he or she believes that it's unconstitutional, even if the court has found it's constitutional. That is fit for a king and a kingdom, not for a democratic republic and a president, and I have no doubt that the president chose him because he's so extreme in this manner of placing a president above and beyond the law. It's like printing a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's one more reason he should never serve on the U.S. Supreme Court.
Thank you. For our radio audience, this is City Club of Portland's Friday Forum. I'm Marisa Madrigal. With me today is Jeff Merkley, U.S. Senator from Oregon. Let's now go to the audience for questions. Everyone watching or listening today is welcome to ask a question. If you've written a question on an index card, hold it high for City Club staff to collect. You can also submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag FridayForum. To City Club members who would like to ask a question at the microphone, please identify yourself as a member and ask one question in 30 seconds or less. Oh, and the microphone is up here.
Winwakala City Club member, and I'm a very optimistic person. I know there's a saying about one step or two steps forward, one step back. And currently, we seem to be going 6 steps backwards. In your daydreams, what will those 12 steps forward look like?
To repeat that question, it's what would 12 steps forward look like? Well, it would look like several steps on housing, several on healthcare. Let me just say we have to take on the high cost of drugs, which are deeply damaging. Why do we pay more for the drugs invented in the U.S.? Why do we pay more than the Canadians and the Europeans? We've got to take that on. We should take on a pathway. I've put forward a Medicare for all option, a public option that everyone could choose to be part of Medicare. Listen, I'm tempted to go through each policy area because in my heart I'm a policy person. But in the interest of time, let me just say each of those areas, the fundamentals for families to thrive on healthcare, on housing, on education. Think about this. The budget that was, the appropriation bills that was passed had $160 billion added over a 2-year period for defense on top of what the Department of Defense asked for. How about we take that $160 billion and put $40 billion into housing and $40 billion into infrastructure and $40 billion into healthcare and $40 billion into education? Our country would be far better off.
Next question. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Jared. I'm from David Douglas High School. And go Scots. And my question is centered around students. So the question is, how are students, if authentically involved, if they are in the first place, in national politics, and how can we be involved? How can students be involved in politics, and where are they involved?
So there's so many ways for students to be able to be involved. If one does not have extracurricular activities, one can go right now and volunteer on a campaign. There are so many campaigns going on that would love to have students come, help canvass in the afternoons, or help out in the office, or help answer phones, or help make phone calls, help hold signs, make signs. And because when you get involved through a campaign, you're really thrown into the heart of the democratic debate. But there's the letters to the editor. There's organizing other students into a group to go get involved in the community in some way, and maybe it's a nonprofit rather than a campaign. Maybe it's helping out at the food bank, or it's helping out at Build a House with Habitat. But those are all, use your voice, use your energy, use your time, and just throw yourself into it. Also, feel free here. I saw some folks here. I saw at least one member of the Oregon House of Reps and Senate. Can they raise their hands in here? Okay, there's at least one hand. I see Alyssa Kinney-Guy over here. There's the, you can talk to your state rep. She represents part of David Douglas, so you might live in her portion. And if not now, call her up or call your state rep up and say a group of us or just yourself would like to go have coffee or a Coke at a hamburger stand and talk about what they're doing and why, and what are they doing to help make education better here in the state of Oregon. Thanks.
Can I add?
Would you like to ask another question?
It's just a small, it piggybacks off it. And to tag along with that, how was student voice involved in the creation of policies in the national level?
The student voice has been very, very powerful on selected issues. Very powerful on the issue of equality of opportunity for LGBTQ community. Very powerful in terms of arguing for investments in education. And this last year, in a phenomenal way, very powerful on saying, let's do something about the massive amount of gun violence haunting our nation.
Thank you.
Hi, Senator. Steve Freeland, City Club member. Yesterday, I had the good fortune of watching this Judiciary Committee, and Senator Cory Booker, as you may recall, said, quote, about to commit an act of civil disobedience, and Senator Corn, of course, responded. It was quite a dramatic moment, historically, I think, to bear witness to several of the Democrats ready to also be expelled, or at least saying, bring it on. I want to ask you if you believe that we're at a time where Democrats in the Senate, given the circumstances with this particular nominee and what's happened since, of course, going back to when our prior opportunity for a possible justice was held up, if you will, an act of civil disobedience perhaps by the Republicans. If you think that the Democrats are pondering other actions like what we witnessed on television nationally and internationally by Senator Corker.
So on the issue of Kavanaugh, there's a lot of discussion of various strategies to be able to take on what we feel is an absolutely rigged system. And the act you described by Cory Booker came out of this. First, there are 5 years of documents that we have none of them. And it was for documents that the nominee Kavanaugh was involved in as an advisor to President Bush. The Republicans said when there was a nominee, Kagan, from President Obama, that every piece of paper she was involved in, they should be able to see. And we agreed, full transparency. And now that it's a nominee from a Republican president, the Republicans are saying, oh, you don't need all that paperwork. And furthermore, the paperwork we are getting has gone first through a vetting process run by a Republican lawyer who used to work for Kavanaugh. Talk about a completely rigged system. And so the question is, what are they hiding? Because clearly they're hiding a lot. And why do we not have profiles and courage and have colleagues who, in a bipartisan way, we all stood up for transparency for the record for nominees from President Obama? Shouldn't we all stand up together in a nonpartisan or bipartisan way for full transparency on a nomination coming from the Republican president? That would be integrity.
Go ahead.
Cathy Moines, member of the City Club. As a humanist, I've got a lot of issues that I'm concerned about, but as a humanist, I'm really concerned about what appears to be almost the destruction of separation of church and state that's going on, and particularly with the judges that are being rapidly appointed, many of them filling vacancies they wouldn't let Obama fill, that the courts aren't going to be as good at enforcing that boundary. And I'm just wondering, is there anything within Congress that can be done if we take over the House? Are there Republicans in the Senate who maybe have similar concerns that aren't up for re-election and might be willing, because the executive branch and the courts are probably not going to be helping us, but things about it's not undue burden for somebody to sign a piece of paper saying I won't give my employees contraception, but it's not an excessive burden in making a woman go to another state for an abortion.
I caught the first part of that in terms of separation of church and state, and I think that's a fundamental principle that is extremely valuable. It isn't just the courts. The administration said they were going to stop enforcing the laws that are on the book for that separation. I think we should maintain that separation division as a very healthy part of making sure there's opportunity for everyone of every religion to have their full place in our society, our full opportunity to exercise a full set of rights. I'll tell you, I was very disturbed. This is a little bit tangential to your comment, but I told you all that I led a trip to Burma because of the genocide there. Horrific genocide. 350 villages burned, systematic rape, people having their houses burned down, children slaughtered in front of them, people being shot from helicopters, and 700,000 refugees across the border. Our president has not said one public word about this massive genocide in Burma. Not one word. Why? And the answer, I have to believe, after many conversations with many people, is because the victims were Muslims. That is a horrific commentary on the United States. We should be champions for human rights and justice inside our country and outside our country, no matter what religion the group is that's being persecuted.
That is a great segue into this question. We have a question from the audience on an index card. How do you explain the effect of Trump's policies to people who limit themselves to Fox News, so in that polarized world?
Well, this would be a lot like my town halls in Oregon counties that are very red. And a good example of this is that in 2009, 2010, I had a lot of town halls where folks came and said, how dare you support this Affordable Care Act or Obamacare because it's being developed and run by a foreign-born, Saudi-controlled socialist communist who wants to do a government takeover of health care. Why don't you listen to us, they'd say. And I'd say, well, let's listen to everybody in the room. And I'll describe major features of Obamacare, and you can vote, step forward, step backwards. Well, first, children being able to stay on your policy to age 26. How many feel that was a step forward? And I imagine a lot of people here think it's a step forward. But they also, the vast bulk in those very Republican gatherings, thought that was a step forward. How about being able to compare your insurance policies on a computer so you can pick the one best for your family? Oh no, step forward. How about tax credits so middle-class families can buy? Oh no, we like that. And I'd go through the list of things, and when I finished, the person standing up had no idea why they opposed the Affordable Care Act. Because they opposed it because of an artificial argument about some government takeover that had nothing to bear with the actual reality. And it turns out the House district in America that was probably most helped by the Affordable Care Act was our Eastern Oregon House district, where a lot of those conversations were taking place. And I can guarantee you, folks in Eastern Oregon do not want to see, they may not like Obamacare, but they sure like the Affordable Care Act.
Thank you.
Senator Greg DiLoretto, City Club member, do you have a sense of when we are going to get out of Afghanistan? Get out of Afghanistan?
When we're going to get out of Afghanistan? Back in, I guess it was probably 2011, I led a resolution on the floor of the Senate that said we are sending a message to the president to get out of Afghanistan and do it more quickly, if in any way possible, than the plan to be out by 2014. And the first year that I did that, it passed by a voice vote, but that was stripped out in conference. So the following year, which I believe was 2012, I talked to John McCain and said I wanted to do this amendment again, and he said, okay, fine. He said, a voice vote again? I said, no, we have to have a recorded vote because it was tossed out in conference last year, and Americans deserve to know where their senators stand. This did not make him happy. And I'm glad I was able to work with him on other issues after that in which we saw it on the same side. But the Senate proceeded to vote, and by a supermajority sent the message to the president, bipartisan, blue and red, shut down this war. I have been over there. I have held so many conversations. Our very presence gives a cause to the Taliban. Because we are a Western nation, we are a nation with a different predominant religion, we are a nation with a different language, we're far afield. I think about the last stanza of a poem by Rudyard Kipling, and I think it was titled The English Soldier, or something like that. And it's kind of a horrific stanza, so bear with me here. It goes something like, if you're shot and lying on the Afghanistan plain, roll over on your rifle and blow out your brains before the women carve up what remains. Bleak, right? But it was a commentary on the British were not welcome in Afghanistan. And it is an enormously corrupt system, a paralyzed political system. We have had the same set of, well, only ifs for year after year. It is time for us to get completely out and shut down that war.
We have time for one final question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Asha. City Club member. Thank you for coming down and speaking with us today. I actually have two questions. So my first question is, you're on the Senate Appropriations Committee, and I was wondering if you had any interesting updates for votes that were recently taken, and maybe any input about funding for EPA and what that's going to look like this year. The second one is, we all know that the demographics for the Senate are vastly different than the demographics of this country in age, gender, socioeconomic status, and race. And I'm wondering, what us as citizens can look to actions from the governing body of the Senate that will let us know that you're really hearing our concerns and implementing policies that reflect them.
Yeah. This is going to be very quick, and then I'm running to the door to try to catch the plane. And so on the EPA, we're trying to keep the same funding we had. We're not going to get an increase, but I think we'll succeed in keeping it about level funded with some help from across the aisle. The second question on whether the leadership of the Senate understands where we're coming from, was that the question? And I would say that Mitch McConnell is not at all an advocate of the fundamentals for the things we've been talking about, the healthcare, the housing, the education, the living wage jobs. He is very much an architect of political power rather than pondering how to strengthen families in America. So we have to be even more effective, and it comes right back to elections and organizing and activism, that we are not going to elect folks who aren't fighting for thriving families and a healthy planet and stopping the corruption of our Constitution. Thank you, and God bless.
And with that, our time is up, and we need to pause the discussion so Senator Merkley can catch his plane. Please join me in thanking Senator Merkley and Marisa for being here today. Thank you to the David Douglas Civic Scholars for joining the conversation, and thank you to